Great. Thanks very much. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you today, to speak about reversing bee decline. So, yes, I'm a professor in ecology in Trinity College Dublin. I'm also the Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action in Trinity. And I'm also the President of the Entomological Society and co-founder and help to coordinate the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So I'm busy, but I'm delighted to be with you here this evening. Well, to virtually be with you in the room this evening to talk about bee decline. So, first of all, what kind of bees are we talking about? Which bees are in decline and which need our help? I think we're all aware of managed honeybees and colony losses. So, lots of beekeepers are recording the health of their hives. They're looking out for their bees and they're telling us about them when something happens. And they have a loud political voice. And many people actually don't realize that they're not the only species of bee, that these aren't actually the ones that are in trouble. In fact, globally and in the EU, there are more managed honeybees than ever. So this graph just shows since the 1960s to the 2020, the number of honeybee hives across the world in the orange line and in Europe in the green line. So we can see that the number of hives has actually doubled globally since the 1960s. So it's not the decline of managed bees that we're focusing on reversing, it's the rest of them, the wild bees. And we still don't know exactly how many species that is. There's a recent paper that estimated there's about 24,000 species of wild bees worldwide. And there's probably lots that still need to be described. So particularly from Africa, from Asia, and from the Americas. So in Europe, we've got a good handle on our bees, but across the rest of the world, there's probably still much more to discover. In Ireland, we don't have quite that many species. In Ireland, we have around about 100 species. So we have the honeybee, both managed and wild honeybees. We have 21 species of bumblebee and around about 80 species of solitary bee. And I've just put in these two images here, are these beautiful posters that are available from pollinators.ie of all of our bumblebee species and all of our solitary bee species. And they're not all in decline. I suppose that's the first thing to say. The way that we measure how threatened a species is through what's known as a red list. So it's an official assessment of the status and the extinction risk of a species. And these red lists have been created for bees for the parts of the world where we know more about the bees. So for Europe, for Britain and for Ireland. So in Europe, we have about 1,900 species of wild bee. And the latest red list that was published last year showed that more than 10% of the European wild bee species are at risk of extinction. That doesn't really sound like too many, but it's around about 172 species, which is almost 100 more than were at risk 10 years ago. And more worrying is that a further 33% of the bees, so a third of all the European bee species, are in decline. Um, and then this last statistic here that 14% of them were data deficient. So this means that the species couldn't be assessed because there wasn't enough information. We don't know enough about them. So they're probably species that are quite rare. They're probably species that are also threatened. So the picture in Europe isn't great. In Ireland, when we did a similar red listing exercise back in 2006, we found that 30% of our bee species were at risk of extinction, and more than half of them were in decline. So this is a worrying picture because it's worse than the European trend. And even our common species are in decline. And this graph here shows data over time from 2012 to last year, to actually 2024. It shows a graph of bumblebee data from citizen science, from people taking part in bumblebee monitoring schemes. And we can see even the common species that are recorded on those schemes are declining slowly. So it's a bit of a worry. What is it that's causing this decline? It's the same sort of processes all over Ireland, all over Europe, and all over the world. So one of the key drivers is loss of habitat, so that the bees have nowhere to live, a loss of wildflowers that they feed from, so they're hungry, an increase in pests and diseases, which are causing them to become sick. Agrochemicals and particularly pesticides are causing poisoning. And of course, we also at the same time have climate change, which is changing the environment and shifting the seasons and making the environment less hospitable. So it's this combination, this multiplicity of drivers that's causing these declines that we see, these really worrying declines. So if we know what bees need in a landscape, they need food, they need shelter, they need safety, then we can start bringing these things back. So in terms of reversing this decline, if we know what's causing the decline, we can tackle that. So the first thing that all organisms need, and bees are no different, is that they need food. And bees depend on floral resources for their entire life cycle. So the adults feed on nectar from flowers. So this is a sugary solution, which gives them energy. So this gives them energy to fly, energy to forage, energy to look after the next generation. But they also collect pollen, and mainly this pollen is fed to the larvae. So this is the larval life stage. This is the food that's packed full of protein and nutrients, and it helps larval development and growth. And in the pictures on the right-hand side there, the top picture is the familiar hexagonal cells from a honeybee hive. And you can see the different colors of the different cells is because they've collected different types of pollen and they pack it into the cells. And in the bottom picture there, what we see is the cells of a solitary bee, where there's different pollen packed into these individual cells. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So all bees depend on floral resources for their entire life cycle. And as soon as I say that, all bees, there are the occasional species that buck the trend. Maybe we'll talk about those at the end. But most bees depend on floral resources for their entire life cycle. And most species, in terms of where they live, in terms of shelter, most species are solitary, and that means that they don't live in hives. There's a single female who builds a nest on her own, and she lays her eggs, and she provisions those eggs with pollen. So she provides pollen for when the eggs hatch. The larvae feed on the pollen, but the larvae does that completely in isolation. So it's in a sealed up cell. It's solitary. And it develops on its own. So that's what we mean when we talk about solitary bees. So this is the life cycle of a solitary bee. The adult female bee collects pollen. She puts pollen into a cell. She lays her egg on that cell. The egg hatches. The larva develops and grows and pupates within that cell, and then emerges as an adult, and the whole thing goes around. And those cells, most solitary bee species form these cells in holes in the ground. And I don't know whether you can see in the pictures on the right-hand side, because they're very tiny. So in that kind of grassy patch, there's a couple of holes. I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen. You probably can't, but there's a couple of holes in that grass, and then in the soil bank on the right hand side, you can see, if you've got really good eyes, you can see a couple of holes there. So most of our solitary bees nest in holes in the ground, but some of them nest in cavities. So the third photo at the bottom right hand side there is of a cavity nesting bee, and these are the ones that nest in the bee hotels, or if you provide a block with drilled holes in it, and naturally they'd nest in holes in old tree stumps and things like that. But most species nest in the ground. So most species are solitary, and most species nest in the ground. A few species are social. So 5% of all of those bee species globally are social. So that means they have a queen who's the single reproducing female. She lays the eggs. If the eggs are fertilized, they become females who don't lay eggs but become workers. And at some point, the queen starts producing unfertilized eggs, which become males. And she produces new queens as well, so females that are fed a special diet. And eventually the colony builds up. The new queens and the males leave. They do what they do. The old queen dies, and the new queen overwinters, and the cycle goes round again. So Our social bees have quite long life cycles. So our bumblebees have quite long seasonal cycles. So they need flowers right across the season, as well as safe places to nest. And most of these species actually nest in holes in the ground as well. So they need food, they need shelter. And the problem is that we've lost a lot of that across our landscape. Intensive agriculture has changed so that the landscape is less pollinator friendly. So we used to have a lot of diverse hay meadows in which cattle were grazed or the hay was harvested. But now with high intensity single species grasslands, we've lost that diversity. And as well as losing the diversity of plant species that provide food, we've our habitats, the landscape has become much more simplified, and there's been the loss of these habitat features that provide nesting places and places for these bees to overwinter. So there's been a loss of food and shelter across the landscape. And there's no shortage of evidence to tell us that bee decline is driven by these multiple pressures. So changes in land use, the widespread use of a cocktail of pesticides, infectious diseases and parasites spread from managed pollinators, climate change, nutritional challenges that come from a lack of suitable flowers to feed on because of all of these things. All of this contributes to a reduction in bee health, in individual health, in populations, in species, and in communities. So there's a lot of evidence, and on the slide here are just some of the high profile papers that we've produced in the last few years with this evidence of what's driving bee decline. So we know what's driving the decline. And the reason that people are concerned about the decline of bees is that bees are really important animal pollinators, and 90% of all plant species on the planet are animal pollinated. So they're not all bee pollinated, and they're not all dependent on pollination, but 90% of Earth's species benefit, Earth's plant species benefit from animal pollinators. And in this part of the world, in Europe, in Northwest Europe in particular, the insects and particularly the bees are really important pollinating species. So that enables plants to cross-fertilize, to produce seeds, and to continue their populations into the next generation. And hardly surprisingly, most of our crop plant species are also animal pollinated. So about 75% of the world's leading crop plant species are animal pollinated. So the major carbohydrate crops like wheat, like rice, like corn, they're not animal pollinated, but all of our fruits and our vegetables, oils and seeds, without animals like bees visiting flowers, transferring pollen within and between flowers, a lot of these species wouldn't be able to produce the fruits and the seeds that have the flavor, the antioxidants, the vitamin C, the fiber. Our animal pollinators are really key to producing these foods. So they're key to keeping us healthy, for our food to taste good, and to enhance the quality of our life. And so they're also really important economically. So in many parts of the world, when we talk about reversing bee decline and we talk about the importance of bees, it's related to crop pollination and the fact that we need bees to produce crops. Now, in Ireland, that argument doesn't necessarily work because we don't produce a huge amount of insect pollinated crops at the moment. But if we reverse decline in our bees and maintain our bee fauna and make sure that we have a healthy bee community across the island, it gives us the option in the future. And the photograph here of the strawberries in the glass house, bees can fly in and into these glass houses and help with the pollination, but also the growers understand that they need bees and they actually bring in artificial hives. And it's not just bees. I think I probably need to say that at this point. It's not bees that are important pollinators, but we actually benefit through in Ireland it's mostly bees and hoverflies, in fact, and various kinds of other flies, along with butterflies and moths, but also beetles. Basically any animal that visits a flower and whilst visiting that flower picks up pollen and accidentally moves it to another flower acts as a pollinator. So when we talk about pollinators, it's a real botanical term because we're talking about what it does for the plant. When we talk about bees, we're talking about a taxonomic group of animals. But the point is, our bees and other pollinators are in decline. They're important ecologically, and they're important in terms of our food production systems to give us resilience and opportunities in the future, and they're economically important globally. So because of all of this, if you remember the talk from Una and Kate a few years ago, we put together the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So there's myself and Una a few years ago now, looking very fresh-faced when we started all of this. And what we did was we looked at those data from the red listing, and you know, a third of bee species at risk of extinction, more than half of our species in decline, and thought, well, you know, we have to do something. There has to be some action taken. And we knew we couldn't do this on our own as scientists. So we put together a cross-sectoral stakeholder group and came up with this shared plan of action, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. And the plan was to try and reverse the decline of all pollinators and create an island where pollinators could thrive and survive. So that's not just our bees, but also 180 species of hoverfly, plus the other pollinators, the flies, the butterflies, the moths, the beetles, the wasps, and all the others. And we initially started to look at three landscape types, so farmland, public land, and private land. And the first pollinator plan, first phase, ran for 5 years between 2015 and 2020. But really what we were trying to do in the All Ireland Pollinator Plan was to follow what's called the conservation mitigation hierarchy. So the first thing is to protect what's there, to avoid damage. So what we're saying is that we don't necessarily need to bring new stuff in. We need to look after what we've already got. So avoid damaging and protect what we've already got. Secondly, was to manage more sensitively, to minimize our impact, to manage our landscapes more sensitively so that they could become more pollinator friendly, to repair any damage that had been done, so to restore areas that needed restoration after they'd been damaged, and eventually then to create or recreate new habitats that pollinators could use. And this is really this kind of standard framework, you know, start with what you've got and start with what's already there is a really important premise. And, you know, and then to look after that, to repair any damage and only create new habitat when you absolutely have to. And the first phase of the pollinator plan really kind of took us by surprise in terms of how successful it was. And at the end of the first phase, the data centre, the National Biodiversity Data Centre, produced this beautiful book called Working Together for Biodiversity. And if any of you are interested, the QR code there should take you to that book. And what that is a whole series of stories from public land, farmland, and private land of what people did to start to reverse this decline in pollinators. And it's incredible. It was incredible for us to see the breadth and the reach of this pollinator plan that we had really just, you know, we dreamt up. We weren't sure if anybody was going to pay any attention to it. And then people got enthused, people got engaged, and people committed to action. So it came to 2020 and we're like, well, we've done everything we said we would do, but there's still more to do. So we launched the second phase of the pollinator plan in 2021. And this time we had 186 actions. And the pie chart there shows you that at the end of the second phase, at the end of 2025, that 92% of those actions were completed, 5% were in progress, and only 3% of those actions hadn't been progressed yet. So hugely successful again. And this time at the end of the second phase, this beautiful video was produced. And I encourage you, if anyone's having a bad day and feels at a bit of a loss with the world and what's going on, just have a look at this video. It's a really lovely little video showcasing some of the fantastic initiatives that have been happening the length and breadth of the island. And when we look at the end of the second phase of the pollinator plan, of the key successes, and I know this is too small for you to read, it's just to remind me to, you know, to highlight some of these achievements, is that through the second phase, 100% of the local authorities, the councils on the island of Ireland, signed up to support the pollinator plan. There was huge public support for pollinator conservation. We developed a pollinator scorecard for farmers. We had a network of monitoring sites established. We continued the Irish Pollinator Research Network. I'll say some more about that in a moment. It's a huge international success story. There's more than 5,000 sites logged on the data center system to show that they've become pollinator friendly. More than 200 local communities become pollinator friendly. Schools, more than 400 businesses. The number of people recording bees has increased 300%. There's big awareness campaigns, etc., etc. Huge amount. And as I say, most of those 186 actions completed. And so just last month, and again, if you need a bit of a lift, this is definitely worth a look. The National Biodiversity Data Centre published this book to celebrate the end of the second phase called 100 Tales of Hope. And it's beautiful. It's beautifully put together, but it's also really inspiring, showing actions that have been taken by different sectors, the length and breadth of Ireland, and on the slides there, if it's not too small for you to see, you might be able to see joining up habitats in Tralee. You might be able to see making Trinity pollinator friendly, and various other stories. So it's a really lovely collection of the work that's happened, and we're so inspired by everything that happens across the island, by the people who've taken this cause to their hearts. So even though phase two, we completed 186 actions, we're still going for a phase three. So the third pollinator plan is, it's been drafted, it's ready. It should be released, I think, next month. And the great thing about this is that we've got some funding from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine and the National Parks and Wildlife Service in the Republic of Ireland, from the Northern Ireland Environment Agency in the north, and from the Shared Island Fund. So this funding, this is the first time that the pollinator plans actually received significant funding, and this has allowed the National Biodiversity Data Centre to really increase the size of the team that's working on the plan. So there's now two farmland pollinator officers, a local communities officer, a local authorities officer, a business officer, a rare species officer, and there's a monitoring programme, including a research assistant in Northern Ireland and an overall project manager. So it's fantastic that we've actually been able to build this capacity, because a lot of the problem in the past was that, there wasn't the capacity to meet the demand. And the way that the third pollinator plan is being structured is into 6 modules, we're calling them. So around farmland pollinators, buzzing communities, local authorities and public bodies, transport authorities and public utilities, business and industry, and rare and threatened species. And then we've got cross-cutting modules. So monitoring, research, mapping, and communications will cut across all of those sectors. So it's really exciting. I'm thrilled that we're at this stage, that we can scale up and scale out and increase our ambition once again in the third pollinator plan. So in terms of the work that I do in Trinity and the work that my team does, obviously we focus very much on the research. And what we did in the first phase of the pollinator plan was to put together all the pollinator researchers in Ireland, and we formed the Irish Pollinator Research Network, the IPRN, and we have an annual meeting every year where we get together in a sort of an informal way to share our research, to share our approaches, our methods, our thoughts, and to be able to then connect our research with policy and practice through the pollinator plan. And the vision for the research module for the next pollinator plan is that Irish research into the drivers and consequences of pollinator loss, into pollinator health, and the most effective ways to restore pollinators is world leading and contributes to these effective solutions for policy and practice, both in Ireland and beyond. So really proud of this group of people. And my gang, my researchers in Trinity, I'll just say a little bit about the kinds of things that they're doing and how they contribute to the plan. So I've got a fabulous crowd. So this is Marcia. She is a PhD student. She's looking at pesticide residues and nutrition in the pollen collected by bumblebees. This is Clementine. She is looking at the benefits of ponds in agricultural landscapes. She's a Teagasc Walsh scholar, and so she's looking at ponds for pollinators. Fernanda Azevedo is a PhD, another PhD student. She's looking at what motivates farmers to get involved with pollinator conservation and also what challenges do they have. We really want to hear from farmers about why they might not get involved or if they haven't heard of the pollinator plan or if they don't care about pollinators. So she's conducting a survey at the moment. So if anybody wants to pass that survey on, I can give you the link for that survey. Sarah is working on this big EU project called RESTPOL, where we are trying to create a suite of tools for restoration across landscapes. So bringing together tools for different actors across landscapes across Europe. And actually, Sarah there was working on this project with me for the last 2.5 years. She's just moved to the National Biodiversity Data Centre as the project manager for the pollinator plan. So it's very sad for me that she's left RESTPOL, but I'm very happy that I will continue to work with her in the pollinator plan. We're also looking, Kate and Harry are working on a project looking at if we restore landscapes and we take action for pollinators, what are the knock-on benefits? Are there multiple benefits? Are there co-benefits for other species? And Moya, Katie, and Sarah are involved in a project that's examining novel technology for monitoring. So the use of remote cameras and motion sensitive cameras for pollinator monitoring that can be rolled out at scale. At the moment, they're sort of in a pilot and a testing phase. And so we're testing whether those things are actually useful as pollinator monitoring technology. So all of the research that the students, the researchers that work with me do, this can help to feed in to what we understand about pollinators, how we can restore habitats for pollinators, and how can we find out whether our restoration has actually been successful. There are still big knowledge gaps. I mentioned at the beginning that there's huge knowledge gaps, even in terms of what kinds of bees are out there, particularly in other parts of the world. There's not very much information on status and trends. So for most taxa across most of the world, we don't know the status and trends. The knowledge of the impacts of direct drivers and the interactions between drivers is limited, and the indirect drivers, so things like, how our global trade and our policies and our politics and how those influence the loss of habitat and the use of pesticides, that's still there's plenty of scope for more work there. Thirdly, multiple benefits. I just mentioned that there's some research to be done on multiple benefits. So societal and economic impacts of pollinator decline are not very well quantified, and there's still, for an awful lot of the world, we still need a lot more knowledge of what the solutions are, of what kind of tailored and actionable solutions can be implemented. I'm nearly finished. I suppose one of the things that's a massive game changer or a potential game changer for pollinator conservation is the nature restoration law. So this is a law that's come from the European, it's come from Europe, and it's being implemented here in Ireland. So the nature restoration law has some high level aims around restoring nature across the whole of the European Union, but across all of the different sectors. And one of the specific articles within the law deals particularly with restoration of pollinators. And so the text is on the slide there. So member states have to put in place measures to improve pollinator diversity and reverse pollinator loss, and they have to monitor their pollinators. So this is fantastic because it puts into practice what we've already been doing in Ireland for 10 years through the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So it elevates it. It means that we're doing something now that is leading in the European context. So we're ahead of the game in that we have the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and we already have a monitoring scheme set up. So what we're hoping is that the nature restoration law means that we can maintain and increase these efforts for pollinator restoration in Ireland and across the whole of Europe. So the next phase of the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, the third phase of the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, really ties in and aligns with the nature restoration law. So it gives it a bit of gives it a bit of political oomph that it didn't have before. And so then the other question I get is what can I do? So we just finish on individuals in the audience, and you're thinking, okay, what on earth can I do to contribute to reversing pollinator decline? The first thing I always say is you can do less. So this is some people like this is mow the lawn less often, use fewer pesticides or none at all is ideal. Leaving areas in your garden for nature, for biodiversity, for pollinators. And the reason that I put this up first is because sometimes we're all desperate to do something when actually sometimes the best thing we can do is to leave nature the space and the time that it needs to recover. And remember that first thing on the conservation mitigation hierarchy was to avoid the damage in the first place. But of course, there are also lots of things that we can do more of. So we can grow things. We can grow more different types of plants. So apples, raspberries, herbs in our gardens, they're fantastic for pollinators and you get some benefit from it as well. But we can also grow more wild plants or allow more wild plants to grow and grow more pollinator-friendly plants. You can advocate. So this is a really important thing. Everybody has a voice. You can advocate for pollinators, for bees amongst your neighbours, your friends, your local estate manager, your local councillors at your kids' school or your grandkids' school, your local businesses, your own place of work. You can ask your bank or your pensions provider if they invest in nature, and if not, why not? So everybody can advocate. Everybody can do something to spread the word. We can also immerse ourselves in nature. So use nature more, get out in nature. I suspect I'm preaching to the choir on this particular webinar, but, picking elderflowers for cordial or blackberries for jam, taking photos, making sketches, going for a walk, looking, listening, noticing nature. There's also an awful lot to learn. And these pictures that I have on the screen here are all from the Pollinator Plan website. So pollinators.ie has loads and loads and loads of resources. So there's just my eyes are flicking to things there about, planting orchards for pollinators or managing a car park for pollinators or the top 10 plants you can grow for pollinators. There's tons of information and advice on the Pollinator Plan website. And then the other thing is, and I suppose this sounds obvious, but I need to remind myself to say it, is you don't have to do it alone. The wonderful thing about the Pollinator Plan is that it's enabled people to connect. So you can form or join a group, connect with people, and then there's the co-benefits associated with working with others, of forming a community, of being part of a group, and not feeling like you're doing this all alone. So I think that's a really important part of doing this, is not feeling like your own and working and connecting with others around you. So I'll finish there. Reversing bee decline takes all of us, takes a whole of society effort. This picture on the last slide here is the front gates of Trinity College, where they used to be very neatly, closely mown, manicured lawns, and we swapped them out for these quite messy looking wildflower meadows. And not everyone loves them, but most people like them. It's not like they're going to change the world, but they do change the conversation. They do change the way that we're managing our land land in the middle of the city centre, and we're just one small patch. So if we work together, if we do this with small changes, then the big changes are possible. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
It's amazing
I
thing.
can't hear anything there.
You hear me now?
Oh yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
You today, no, but really marvelous. That was amazing, and really good to get up to date. Because watching the progress every 5 years, and then to see the next 5 years coming, and the plans ahead. So I was going to hand this mic to Ger Scholar is over there. Ger's with the Kerry branch of the Irish Wildlife Trust. But we were just going to put it out to people. If there's any questions you have for Jane, or you might have a story you want to tell from your own community or parish or school grounds or anywhere that maybe you've done some action and you want to share that. So that's too, yeah. Great. Okay, here you go. So if you're not feeling shy.
Thank you. So does anybody want to add to the conversation? One at the back? Don't find out, it's okay.
Hi, my name is Mike Crowley, and I'm just wondering, is there like a minimum area you suggest like to have go wild in your garden for there to actually be a sufficient impact?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think so. I think any space, however small, can add up. So, some of the urban gardens are very small, and people are just leaving a patch, a strip down the side that's not being mown. I think any small action can help to add up. If we think about the number of gardens there are across the island, and how if everybody just did a small action in their garden, how that would add up, sorry, across the island, it would be incredible. So I would say no action is too small. Go for it.
Neil, this is Jane. I'm a county councillor here in Kerry, West Kerry, and I've had the pleasure of working with Eleanor and Eve and others, and transition for Green. And there's some great work being done in regards to pollinators and replanting native trees. On question about public lands and maybe advice as well for county councillors, what we can put in through motions and to advocate for it better. Just the logic of putting a lot of pollinators beside the roadsides, it seems to defy logic to me, because the amount of insects that are getting just squashed in your windscreen, I suppose, and maybe the flight paths of bees and stuff, if it was encouraged maybe to have them higher. I don't know, that's just from a lay person's point of view, but I know there's aesthetically it's brilliant to have flowers, etc., beside the roads, but I don't know data in regards to that. And lastly, I suppose just there's a very old Irish saying about the three mysteries of life, and it was written by a man, of course, over 1,000 years ago. But over the map is one of them, the work of bees, tapped as a map na tigle, the coming and going with the tide, agus into in the minds of women. But it mystifies us, the work of bees and insects, that have particular interest in it, and just the advice for future motions be most welcome. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. And just it's funny actually, this year we've had quite a few people ask us about that issue of, should we really be encouraging bees along roadsides? And I suppose in terms of most of our secondary roads, the roadsides are fabulous habitats for bees, and mostly they can get out of the way of oncoming vehicles. That most of the insect death from cars comes on the faster roads on the motorways. And I think, you know, the proportion of insects that are killed with collision with cars compared to killed by other things is probably pretty low. You know, I do understand it. It seems like a perverse intervention to try and, you know, draw them into somewhere where they're going to die. I guess it's that roadsides, because they're not agriculturally productive land, they're a good place to start. But if we could manage our edges of our agriculturally productive land, our smaller roadways and laneways, if they could become more pollinator friendly, then that's really really the important places. Sorry, I can't hear really well, so I'm not sure if I heard
Well,
everything
no,
that you
it's
said there.
went through very well. Just actually on that is while we look for somebody else to have any other comments on that, it's actually to do with, I was talking to people before about this issue with cars. But more modern cars, more aerodynamic now. So they're actually thinking a lot of the insects are actually blown up around behind the car rather than it being, like we all know from 20 years ago, you'd have a windscreen that'd be a lot more cleaning required from after a drive. But if you look at the shape of cars, they've actually changed in the last 20 years. Before they used to be boxes, now they're actually very sleek, and the design of them is allowing a different airflow around them. So that has been one issue that might help, but it's the hedgerows in our local areas. We need to develop them, and it's native plants as well. And I won't get into my usual bugbear or one or two back West Kerry, but we'll the promotion of local plants in the hedgerows and appreciation of them. And once people get appreciation, they have ownership of that area, and it's their own area. And I think that's what, once people get ownership, they want to keep them. And I think that's really very important for our experience. We have another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And my question is about change locally. And I live in an apartment block, and we have lovely raised beds in between the apartments, and they give us a little bit of privacy during summertime. But we have this wonderful plant called Mombrisha, and it comes up every year without fail, and you have to do no work at all, and it will be there. But I'm not sure that it is the best plant to encourage bees and insects. And my question at the end of all that is, if we were to rip it out, what would we put in place that would give us the same degree of privacy in terms of the height, I mean, and would be good for bees and the insects.
I think is it Mombrisha's. Did you say Mombrisha? Was that the plant that you said? It's quite weedy. It's quite, once you've got it, it's hard to get rid of. I suppose the thing that we always say is that so it's not about replacing one thing, rid of something, that it's trying to then encourage a diversity of plants to replace it. And I think I heard you say it's in a raised bed. So it's something that you do need to plant something in there. There's and I'm not going to specify plants, but I'm going to point you towards the resources on the Pollinator Plan website, because they have top 10, there's a guide of top 10 plants to plant in different situations, and there's a guide for planting in containers. And so some of those species might be more suitable. So I'd encourage you or your management committee or whoever looks after the raised beds to have a look at those.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Jane, I'm Mary Burke here. I'm just wondering how you managed to convince the authorities in Ecology to to stop mowing. I'm sure it's probably.
Sorry, I can't hear too well. It's breaking up quite a bit.
I'm just wondering how you managed to convince the authorities in Trinity to stop mowing and to allow to rewild basically. I know a long question, a long answer, I imagine.
Yeah,
that a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, no, that's the reason I'm laughing is because it took a long time. So the first time I suggested it, they were outraged and horrified at the idea that we would stop mowing. I mean, and I suppose you think about it, the guys, the landscapers, they've been trained, they've been working for decades to a particular way of landscaping, particularly in Trinity, which is very kind of formal grounds. And we were saying to them, don't do that, and then their pride in their work was diminished. They thought people would judge them, that they weren't doing their job properly, and so it took a conversation. It took time. So that the front gates there, the project at the front gates, we actually asked for the opinions of staff and students and visitors. Would you like to see these lawns managed in a different way? And there was an overwhelmingly positive response. So that sort of gave us the mandate to give it a go. And we said, we'll give it a go. If it's awful, if people hate it, we'll reverse it. But actually people have loved it, so we've kept it. And then in the other areas on campus, we persuaded them to do the no mow May thing and not mow the lawns during May. And for the two front lawns, as you first arrive in Trinity, the first year we did it at the end of May, our Professor of Botany spotted a really rare orchid growing in one of these lawns, and we said, well, can we not mow them anymore? So now they're only mown once a year. And then other lawns that are used more heavily, we have patches that are not mown during May, and we have patches that are mown. So we've tried to keep that sort of diversity of habitats, even in our quite small campus. But yeah, it took time, and it took conversations with the land managers, because it is a mind shift. It's a change in the way things are perceived, as well as the way that things look. But I think we've got there. The grounds guys are fantastic, and they've come on board and they take pride in it now. So it's a really nice progression to have made.
Yeah, and a rare rocket find usually does benefit these things very easily as well. Anyone else? Any other questions? Well, I try. But just a kind of maybe a closing point on that with community aspect of the thing as well. And I think Jane would probably agree with this, is in projects where you see stuff being done like for the pollinator plan, and you see stuff that you like, if it's say council land, to actually compliment them on it. Because 100 people who walk by like it and not say anything, and one person will complain, and that's the person that they listen to. If you see these positive things being done, it's to give you
Yeah.
And like it doesn't need a rare rocket every time, but it is nice as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, the local councils that are making the effort and doing the good work love to get positive feedback on it. So yeah, good feedback is also good, as well as the complaints.
That's great. I was going to say, I won't put Alan on the spot there, but Alan Balfe, he's the education officer and ecologist here in the wetlands. But Alan, do you want to maybe mention, because you're doing bee surveys, so Alan's been doing bee surveys in the grounds of the wetlands and then teaching members of the public. And I don't know whether you want to say anything about that, Alan, from your side.
Yeah, I think we're getting good support. Everyone's coming to us, and we're actually seeing a higher amount of red-tailed bees, and I don't understand. I suppose that's maybe a question: how come some? For most of the last 3 or 4 years, we've not had red-tailed bees. You see 1 or 2, and now all of a sudden we're seeing a good few of them. is that just locally they're doing well, or is it just they just like the tribes and see it more often, getting tribes? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I can't hear you too well. I heard something about red-tailed bees.
I was saying we do a lot of bee surveys here and with the public and everything, and it's been fantastic. And there's a few people in the room here that have done that with us. It's just a small question I had is that I just see a lot more red-tailed bees.
Okay.
And like every other year we only see like one or two, but for some reason there seems to be a few this year. So that is this year just a good year for them, or?
It's one of the really hard things about monitoring bees and monitoring most insects is that they vary hugely from year to year. So you need the kind of the long-term picture to be able to say something about trends, because they're so sensitive not only to the weather that we're having right now, but also to what it was like last year. So last year was a relatively good year for the bees. There was a lot of sunshine. There was a lot of flowers to feed on. It was a relatively good year. So you'd expect populations to do quite well this year. But then this year the weather's been completely different and very changeable, and we had a very long and cool spring. So it's hard to know. So year to year, when people ask about, I've seen more of these things or more or less of these things, it's often it could possibly be an indication of things to come, but really you need to see what happens over several years. And this makes it quite frustrating, really, because it takes us several years before we can say, okay, actually that pattern is real. So that graph that I showed from the bumblebee monitoring data that from the citizen science bumblebee monitoring walks that have been happening since 2012, it's only sort of in the last few years that we've been able to say, okay, actually that is a real trend, and it's going in the wrong direction. So we're doing all of this for pollinators. There's thousands of people and loads of areas that are being managed for pollinators, and even our common species are still in decline. It means that it's very hard to see responses to conservation actions. What we know is that when we create habitat that is pollinator friendly, we see more insects coming to it. So by that measure, we think if we've got more pollinator friendly land, we should see more insects declining trend reversed. But the problem is it's not just the amount of area that we need to be pollinator friendly. We need it to be managed in a pollinator friendly way, and we need the landscapes to be pollinator friendly. So it's about joining up the dotscapes where the water quality and the soil health is high. Remember, most of our species nest in the soil. So soil health is hugely important to pollinators. And we need landscapes that are resilient to the effects of weather, to flooding, to drought, because all of that affects our bees and other insects year to year. So I don't know if that's a true trend on your red-tailed bumblebees this year. It'd be lovely if they were increasing, but I think you need to just keep monitoring, and we'll keep seeing what happens over the next few years.
Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any before we? I noticed, yeah. I'll just do it, yeah, so.
Hi, Owen Keller, Planning Department, Kerry County Council. And one of the big changes that's likely to happen in the coming years is solar farms at a landscape level. And so we're seeing an awful lot of planning applications in Kerry and in other counties as well. Any thoughts on that? Normally, as part of those applications, there are biodiversity measures. So, is it an opportunity to incorporate features for pollinators, or are there risks, or just have you any views on it? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, solar farms. I'm a little bit skeptical about solar farms. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan of renewable energy. I guess I'm of the opinion that we should be putting solar panels on areas that are already developed, built areas. You know, on the roofs of houses, on car parks, on schools, on hospitals. I'm not a fan of solar farms covering green fields. I know it's very attractive and it's much easier for the developers to put the solar panels on a field as opposed to on a piece of built infrastructure. In terms of the impacts on nature, I think the jury's still out. We don't really know. I would be worried about the impacts on flying animals because I think the reflections from solar panels could influence their navigation and the way that they fly. So a lot of insects use landscape scale features and visual features to be able to navigate through the landscape, and a lot of them that so things like dragonflies that lay their eggs in water bodies, and a lot of our pollinating hoverflies do that as well, could be thrown off by I don't know how they affect bird navigation. I don't know how they affect bats and bat hunting. So I'm a little bit skeptical about solar farms. I think I would my preference would be to restore nature on the farms rather than to give them over to renewable energy and try and prioritize the renewable energy production on our built infrastructures. So yeah, I hope that's a sort of answer.
I used to work in UCC, and the head gardener, he spearheaded letting lots of areas go wild, and there's one beautiful meadow along by the River Lee, and there's a bridge, a walking pedestrian bridge over it, and it is one of the most photographed areas now in UCC, and it's also used as a background for webinars. So that is wonderful to see. Now the quad is still, more and looks good for graduations, etc. But lots of the other green areas between buildings, they have sections that are left grow wild, and they have notices up. So it does explain it to people. But again, it was spearheaded by the head gardener, and like people, once it's done, once there's a leader, people actually get to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. And I think that's, that I think the key thing there you say is that, they've put signs up, and it providing an area. It's not just providing a space for nature, people are enjoying it as well. And I think that's, quite often we think of this, that it's people or nature, or it's development or nature, it's agriculture or nature, but we can do both. And there can be these co-benefits and multiple benefits of just creating nice spaces that people want to look at and want to go to, and as you say, want to photograph. And I think that's all credit to the head gardener there for having that vision. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's great. And I suppose even looking around the county, there's examples, similar examples, maybe in, and if I start naming places, I'll forget. But I think of the conversations even over the last 5 years that a lot of tidy town groups have made huge changes in the way they are working with the Kerry County Council as well. But just managing their community fields, like I think of the Priest's Field in Ballyduff, that's now like a big meadow with paths, mowed through it, and it's cut once a year. Or, there's the lovely in St. Brendan's Parish Centre, they've changed their mowing as well in certain areas. And sometimes it's about being brave, having a conversation, but saying, let's try this little bit. And it's funny, it's you have to little by little. Sometimes that little bit becomes a bigger bit. And the different mowing, you know, it's okay to have and that's one thing you've been really good at getting the message across the shortcut mow, you know, every 6 weeks, and that gives certain flowers like the clovers and southfields and daisies, and then the long cut for the oxeye daisies, and so then all the pollinators need different types of mowings as well, you know, which would have been grazing before, but now we're kind of the grazers because we're doing mowing and trimming. So we see as well a lot of the city workers are being trained differently, and there's a community biodiversity program happening locally around Tralee at the moment with the local ETV, and that's come through with tidy towns as well. So, and there's Sneem, I know there's people from Sneem here today, and there's people just all around the county trying out lots of little things in their own villages or their own gardens and local communities. So, and I like your idea, it's the joined up, that the ecological corridors and how they all connect, but they're connecting our communities as well as the pollinators. So I think that's a really important point.
Yep.
Okay, we might finish up with Jane. We're so delighted and honoured to have you here this evening. But I suppose what we will do is a little plug for the festival that will be happening in July, and we hope you'll all go away with some programmes and pass them around in your local communities. But we will, on the Wednesday before the festival on the 1st, we're going to do a little planting of some fruit trees along the Rock Street part of the Greenway. And then on the Saturday and Sunday, there's lots of events here in the wetlands. So again, and we do look at the community actions for pollinators, but this year we were looking at how building resilience in our communities also builds resilience for the pollinators. So again, we're doing multiple benefits of working with communities and pollinators together. We do have Mary Burke, who had filled in, created this most gorgeous love heart out of willow for her. She is going to be doing timber, find your perfect match of plant, and that's going to be in the grounds of the wetlands on the Saturday. And we then have a lovely ecological corridor walk from the wetlands into the Tralee Town, the Green, into the Tralee Town Park, and we have people from Save the Green, Tommy Collins and Sean, they'll be accompanying us. And we're going to again visit different spots, and there's the community garden there as well, just to see all the different areas of pollinators around between here and the town. And we're looking at the importance of wetlands for pollinators. That's the big emphasis here as well, because we tend to live in a wet land. And then I suppose on the Sunday we have the bee surveys will be happening here in the grounds, and we'll be doing hopefully a fit count, you know, the flower insect time count, and show people how to do that. And there'll be a bit learning on how to identify the different bees and how to submit the records to the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So I think tonight you can really see the importance of getting those records in. They do all really help. And we will have Phil that day who'll be doing lovely artwork and our creative crafts with Willow from the Tralee Bay wetlands here as well. I hope. And then we're going to do an outreach event in Ballybunion with Ballybunion Nature Group at some stage in July. Mid-July, date to be confirmed. Yeah. So I think that's it. I think we've covered everything. We just want to say, it's so inspiring for us to have a room full of people on a Monday evening coming out to hear about reversing the bee decline. So we're really delighted you all came, and we'd love to see you again over the weekend in July. And we just stay in touch, and we might share some of the the QR codes or links, and we might share them afterwards to the group through anyone who registered. We can send them out through an email. So is that all right? I'll say if everybody knows.
Thank you.